Welcome everybody to episode number 286 of Goulet Q&A, where fountain pens are still a thing. I am Brian Goulet from gouletpens.com to share this meticulously slapdash and succinctly rambling video where I take your fountain pen, ink, and paper questions and answer them as only someone who's devoted an unreasonable amount of their life to fountain pens could. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about why ink starts out darker then lightens up as you keep writing, how much silicone grease to use when eyedropper converting a pen, who should consider buying an ultrasonic cleaner, finding JoWo spare feeds, if boiling moldy ink makes it clean again. That's a new one for me. Sailor pens for people with big hands, carrying Franklin-Christoph pens, and removing shimmer from shimmer ink. I got a ton of ink questions this week. I had to mix in other stuff, so I got a bunch that I'm saving for later as well. But let's start off with a little bit of feedback from previous videos, shall we? Pink 1792 Megs said that Lamy bit was spectacular. Thank you. I got a lot of good feedback on the Lamy stuff, so I'm really glad that was useful. Jess53NZ also said, yay, a new random intro line that Brian will never memorize. Well, that's very true. OMG, I only use Lamy All-Stars and had never noticed the logo ends up in different places. New OCD thing to annoy me. Yes, please continue with fun facts or writing prompts, not business questions from me, but can easily skip. So I got a mix of feedback about questions of the week, writing prompts, fun facts. So maybe I'll mix it up. Not quite sure. But either way, seems like there's a little something for everybody. So yeah, I'll see you. Maybe I'll try some different things. But I appreciate that feedback, everybody. MK Buki says, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Question of the week. Longest online retailer. I started using Amazon in 1995 when they sold only books. There were a bunch of people that said that they were buying from Amazon back from the book days, which I guess that's not super surprising since we're a very, literary crowd, I would imagine. But yeah, that's a long time. That's, what is that? 3 decades? 3 decades now? That's crazy. It is 2024 after all. Lots of Amazon people, lots of eBay people. So that's kind of fun just to read up on who y'all been shopping with so long. And then we got Ichiro fake name. This is about good pocket pens, right? So a question I answered last week. Those who want a pocket-sized pen with a truly premium nib might consider the Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini. Millions of beautiful colors. Overpriced. I can't stop buying them. That's true. They're really the same prices, the regular Slims, but they are pretty cool. It was a more expensive pen than what was asked about. The original question was about the Goulet Brass Sport. And so that was, the Slim Mini is 3 times the price, maybe more. So I didn't include that one, but it is a really good pen and a good suggestion for a pocket pen. So I thought that was worth including. And that's it for feedback now. We had lots of good stuff, lots of good questions. I just really appreciate y'all engaging so much. It gives me lots of good stuff to work with. I do have a couple of company updates though. One is that we have a mental health half day. As you're watching this, I guess this would be today, or as this video is publishing. I'm recording this earlier in the week. You may not be watching it on Friday, but either way, October 25th on Friday is a mental health half day for me and the Goulet Pens team. So we'll be taking some paid time off to take care of our mental health, which we can all use. I'll probably be wrapping up shooting some videos because I've got a video shoot for some non-Q&A style videos. They'll take a while to edit and stuff. So they'll be coming out forthcoming, but I've got that going on. Probably going to run a little bit long, so I might cut into my mental health time to wrap up some of that, but it's quite all right. I love doing it. And then I'm probably going to be doing a little bit of woodworking maybe, and probably playing some instruments, some guitar, bass, saxophone, just whatever I feel like playing. So that's a good release for me. And then another little bit, we have Fountain Pen Day coming up soon. If you're not familiar with Fountain Pen Day, it's basically a kind of made up holiday that we came up with in the pen community to say let's just celebrate how awesome fountain pens are and share the love and use our pens. And a lot of retailers will do sales and discounts and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a cool little fun thing. It's been going on for, I think, more than a decade at this point. So that'll be happening. It's always the first Friday in November, which is the earliest that it could possibly be this year on November 1st, which is going to be Friday next week. So we'll have some sales and deals for sure, but it's also a good time to, just use your pens, clean them out, just devote some time to loving on your fountain pens and using them, sharing them with others, post on social, whatever you need, whatever you enjoy doing, just spend some time with your pens and enjoy that. And then last thing, before I get into the questions, I did get a lot of good feedback from folks asking me to share more like personal information, and I'm still kind of find that balance. It's like I get a lot of good feedback about like how long this video goes, about how short it should be, all these kind of things. People want more segments, but they also want it to be short. I don't know. We're all over the map, but I'm still kind of dialing it in, figuring it out. But I have to tell you, my hand's all bandaged up here. I need a little bit of explaining to do, so I'll share a little bit of personal anecdote just because you're going to see this in this video. I don't want you to be concerned. But this past weekend, I did a 5-mile trail run, which I'm more of a cyclist, not so much a runner. I don't really have a runner's body so much, but I thought I would challenge myself. I've never done an organized trail run before. I did okay. Was not setting any records, but my goal was to complete it without getting injured. And I did accomplish that on the actual trail run. However, 2 days before, as I was doing my last run to sort of prepare for it, I was doing a 3-mile run and I was on a trail that was gravel covered. And wouldn't you know it, my foot just perfectly caught a root and down I went. So I caught myself with my hand, scraped up my knee and my shin and everything. My rib is still a little bit sore, I guess, because like I caught it and I sort of like maybe jarred a muscle or something like that. So I'm okay. I don't want you to be concerned. But, I was like, here I am. I'm 40 years old doing this trail run for the first time. And I'm like, yeah, I need to be realistic about myself. So I had a good time. I did really good. My pace, I think I finished it in like 1 hour, 7 minutes or something like that. So not lighting the world on fire. It was like a 13-minute mile pace, which on a trail is not terrible. But anyway, I had a good time, challenged myself, and that was like sort of a, I'm not gonna say it was like a bucket list item, but something I wanted to do, and I was glad I was able to do it. So, but either way, I do not recommend falling 2 days before you have your run. So I did fine on the run, but I am a little bit sore. Anyway, so if you see me like wincing a little bit as I move around, just know that that's what's going on, and you'll see Band-Aids on my hand. Anyway, it's a little bit about me, but let's get into some questions, shall we? All right, first one I have is from Michelle on YouTube. I'm so excited you brought the Q&A back. Awesome. Glad to be back. I have a question, but I feel ridiculous asking. Why is the first line of writing usually darker, almost like the ink oxidized in the pen? It happens on various pens from various brands. I noticed it the most with shimmer inks. Is it my fault? Am I not screwing the cap on all the way? Or is it just that the cap doesn't have a good seal? What is this strange color magic? So I wanted to answer this because I think this is a question that a lot of people have, especially if you're newer to fountain pens. It's not super unusual to experience this. And it's not super duper uncommon either. So I don't want you to feel embarrassed. It's a perfectly legit question. I don't think it's due to oxidation. So oxidation doesn't happen so much when the ink is in like liquid form. If anything, what you would have is because of UV exposure, you would have like UV degradation of the dyes in the ink, which would make it lighter in color, not darker. And then what you also might deal with is evaporation. So, oxidation is like a reaction because of oxygen. It usually happens with some kind of like metal component. So there's really not oxidation happening. But it's possible, I guess, that you could have, a pen that's not sealing well, that some of the ink evaporates out of the feed a little bit, therefore making the water evaporate and the dye is maybe more concentrated, which could make it darker. However, when that happens, it's usually going to be a result that makes the pen write more dry, not seem more wet. So the ink may be darker, but it's also probably going to be stingy and not flow very well, especially if it's to the point where it's like noticeably darker. It's rare that happens in a pen and still like flows well. Usually you'll have that happen if you have it sitting in like an ink sample vial or a bottle of ink that's not sealed well. That sits for a long time, and then, ink evaporates out of that. And then, sits there for a while and you try inking it up and it's still not going to flow well, but it might be a little bit darker. I don't think that's what you got going on here. I think probably more likely you have a lot of excess ink that's in the feed. So I don't know your whole setup, your whole situation here, but this can definitely happen right after you fill a pen. You have a lot of ink that's, in the feed. The feed acts as sort of a regulator for the ink as you're writing so that you get a consistent flow. It's not having to draw the ink all the way from the ink reservoir as you're writing with it. So the fins in that feed sort of act as like a reservoir for the ink that keeps the flow consistent. So when you're first filling the pen, if you're dipping that pen in the bottle of ink and filling it that way, that feed is going to be completely saturated. So it's totally normal for the pen to write more saturated for a little while right after an immediate filling. So that's one thing that could maybe be a factor. That would happen on most pens. Not all pens have visible feeds on the outside of the feed, but a lot of them have internal feeds that are inside that you can't really see. Most feeds are going to have some sort of fin system in there. And then the other thing that could be happening is based on how your pen is being stored. So if you have a pen that's being stored, on its side or nib down, especially, depending on the pen, some of them are more sensitive than others, but you could end up with like sort of gravity that's just keeping the ink, kind of more, at the feed, could end up a little more saturated. And then you could end up with that kind of a situation where you end up with more of a amount of ink in the feed that then, is a little darker, more saturated as you first start writing. And then it sort of gets to its more consistent regular flow as you write on until it sits there for a while again. So that could be an explanation if you're noticing it happening with a pen that you've already inked, but it's happening repeatedly throughout your writing cycle. Maybe that could be an explanation. And the other thing, since you mentioned a lot on shimmer inks, what could also be happening is that you could be getting more of a proper flow kind of at the start, but as you're using those shimmer inks, shimmer is basically particulate that's in that ink, and it could be kind of building up in the feed, maybe starting to block the feed a little bit, right? So, that could happen over time. I don't know what kind of timeline that you're working on here, but it could be something that happens depending on the pen, depending how well it seals. It could be happening after a few days or maybe a week or two, where, the pen just doesn't write quite as wet as it did in the beginning because that particulate is sort of like getting up in the feed. Anytime you use shimmer ink, you want to clean that thing out pretty regularly, definitely after each filling. If you just keep filling and filling and filling the same thing, that stuff could kind of clog up a little bit. It'll vary a lot by the pen, but that could also be, so rather than being like excess wetness that's happening, it could be that you're dealing with a little bit of dryness because of the particulate that's kind of building up in there. Or it could be just other things too, like you could have some, I don't know, like paper fiber or something like that that's getting in the feed that could be impeding the flow a little bit. There's a lot of explanations that maybe could fit to that, but still that would usually be like somewhat of a more consistent thing as opposed to writing really dark and then lightening up. But I imagine that's probably what's going on. It's something where there's not a hyper consistent flow of ink that's coming through. That's what's happening. And the more ink that comes through, the darker it's going to look. I don't know what nib size you're using or what paper you're using, but that can also be a factor too. The wetter the pen, the more your pen will probably flow and have a little bit less of this issue. If you have a finer nib, it's probably going to look a little more dramatic because of any flow variation. But anyway, I don't think you're necessarily doing anything wrong. I just think, clean your pens regularly, be on the lookout for that. If you want to get that, if you like that really dark kind of saturated ink look, then I recommend you can either just, dip your pen in the, dip your nib in the ink, just have the bottle of ink handy. And if you feel like it's writing dry after a while, you can ink it back up. Or not even like full inking, but just kind of dip the nib in there, saturate that feed a little bit and keep on writing. That's one way you can do it. Or if you have a converter or a piston or something like that where you can let down some of the ink, you can just sort of saturate your feed that way and get it flowing really wet again. So either way, fountain pens are fun, aren't they? They just have all kinds of variation and stuff. So anyway, hope that gives you a little bit of insight. All right, next question. We have Blue J Chow on YouTube says, "Hey Brian, what is the right amount of silicone grease when trying to eyedropper a pen? Is less better or more? I'm nervous to try it, but would really love a Kaweco to hold more ink." Well, I'm going to show you how to ink up how to eyedropper convert a Kaweco. So let's go ahead and check this thing out. All right, so what I have here is a Kaweco. This is a classic sport. This is the clear one. And this actually was one of the first pens. This one is one of the first pens that I ever bought. And I bought it specifically so that I could try eyedropper converting a pen because I read about that online and I wanted to try it for myself. So I did have this. We don't sell this one anymore, but it's a really good pen for demonstrating this. So I wanted to show you what's going on. So what happens when you're eyedropper converting a pen is you are taking the entire body, assuming that it's filled like there's no holes in it. That's what I mean by fill. It's like one solid piece, which this pen is, and you're filling the entire thing with ink, right? So what you need to do in order to make that happen is make sure that anything where ink could potentially come out in places that you don't want it to, which is basically anything except for the feed and the nib, you would want to seal up. A lot of pens you can do that with, like a Platinum Preppy, you can do that with an O-ring, but silicone grease is always a good thing to have as an option as well. So this silicone grease, we sell this stuff. It is food grade. It is 100% silicone grease, really good to use. Now the exact amount that you use is going to vary depending on the pen that you use. And a lot of it depends on the threads. What you're really trying to do here is seal up the threads, because that's where the ink is going to want to come out. So if you just get enough on there to cover those threads, that's really all you need. So you asked if is it better to have less? Is it better to have more? I would say it's like a Goldilocks kind of thing. Like you basically just want the right amount, which is whatever it takes to block the threads. So I would say if you're going to err on the side of less or more, I would err on the side of more, because any excess can kind of squeeze out and then you can wipe it away. But if you don't have enough, then ink can work its way through the threads and leak out of your pen, which is obviously not ideal. Now this Kaweco pen has very, very small, very shallow threads, so you don't need a ton of this grease. I've greased it up pretty good here, and again, not like a super scientific amount, and I'm just kind of wiping off the excess. So that right there is going to be plenty. And then let me see if I can get some little ink here this is just my little demonstration ink. I'll go ahead and, I'm technically not using an eyedropper, I'm using a syringe, but we all still call it eyedropper filling, just because that's what it's been called for years and years and years. And then, what I want to do is not fill it up past the threads, because then that would cause me problems and cause leakage. So I'm just going to fill it up. I'll fill it up all the way just because I'm just trying to demonstrate here. But there's a whole heck of a lot more ink than the thing will want to hold naturally. And then now that I have those threads greased, the thing you want to be careful of is you're not putting so much on there that it gets like inside. And then if any of the silicone grease gets onto the feed itself and blocks the ink channel, that's when you can have some problems. So you do want to make sure that you're not slopping on there so much that it gums up all the inside of the pen. But if you get those threads on the outside, you should be in good shape. And then I'll just kind of feed it in here gently, turn it in place. Oh, see, I got a little bit of ink on there that kind of worked its way in. Boom. And then I've screwed that on there, and then you can sort of, if it's a clear pen, you can sort of visually inspect and see to make sure that that silicone grease is kind of evenly spread throughout all the threads. There's a couple little spots where it maybe isn't the best, but overall there's a consistent coverage in the threads. So you can shake it a little bit, maybe have it sit on your desk for a while you're making the silicone grease do its work, and then do that before you carry it around just to make sure you got it all. Now the thing I will say is if you're going to be using just silicone grease and no O-ring, which is kind of what you need to do on this pen, the thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that if you're ever unscrewing it, that you're re-greasing it, because every time you undo it and redo it again, the grease is going to move around, some of it's going to go away, and it may not have a perfect seal again. But at least in this instance, I've got a fresh inking, and I would feel confident carrying this pen around. So that is how you do it with the Kaweco Sport. Again, it's not a ton of silicone grease. Like I just put it on the end of a toothpick, a couple little globs, and that's really all it took. So it's not much you need. This silicone grease will last you for a very long time for eyedropper conversions. And yeah, it's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it's got a few little considerations. But either way, I thought that would be helpful for you. So there you go. Next one. Pavan on YouTube says, "Hello, Brian. I've heard about these ultrasonic cleaners. Does it make sense to buy one? I clean 2 to 3 pens a month, and sometimes I let ink sit in a pen for a longer duration. If the ink is in there, not appropriate just for daily writing, like red. Most of the ink dries up, rather than getting used. Will the ultrasonic cleaner make it easier to clean? Just want your thoughts before I buy and regret." This is a great question. We've gotten asked about ultrasonic cleaners here and there over the years. It's something that I was turned on to very early on in my pen career. And it's never anything that we've sold before because, frankly, you can buy them from like Harbor Freight or Amazon and other places like that. There's none that are specifically made, as far as I understand, for pens. Usually they're either going to be like scientific suppliers or jewelry suppliers, because ultrasonic cleaning is a good way to clean jewelry. So what ultrasonic cleaners do essentially is provide like an ultrasonic frequency that sort of like, gets the water or the cleaning solution that's in this bath, and it like allows it to sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, uses a frequency to sort of like shake it loose, right? And work it loose. So it's particularly helpful if you have really, really dried up crusty ink that's, there, or if it's in like really hard to reach places, which that can happen certainly with a lot of vintage pens, especially if you go like to flea market or an antique shop or something like that. And there's like pens that just have been sitting there forever and the ink's dried up in there. It can be really, really tough to clean out. That's where an ultrasonic cleaner can be helpful. If you're using it just with regular pens that are like newer and you're kind of in your rotation, it can be helpful, but I will say it's not like absolutely necessary. It's really going to be kind of your call. Now, these things can range in price. For the ones that are kind of like big enough to hold, a fair number of pens, I don't know, some of the smallest ones I've seen online, might be like $50. I have no idea how those ones do. The one that I have used for a long time is one that I got at Harbor Freight years ago. It now sells for about $90. So it's kind of an investment. So it's hard for me to say like, yeah, everybody should go get one. If you have access to one, it certainly is helpful. But I wouldn't say that the average person needs to have an ultrasonic cleaner handy. It's the kind of thing that if you are restoring older pens, or you just like really let your pen sit around for a while and get nice and crusty, then you probably could benefit from one. Or if you're like me and you ink up a lot of pens and you let them sit for a long time, they get kind of crusty. And it's not necessarily that they're crusty so bad, but it's that you just have a lot of them to clean out. I find it to be a time saver if I'm going to be cleaning 10, 15, 20 pens at a time. Sometimes it is beneficial to, do just an initial flush and then throw all those parts into an ultrasonic cleaner, run that ultrasonic cleaner, and it can clean all that stuff kind of at once, and then just sort of flush it out again, and then it's pretty much good to go. So it can be a time saver if you're like batch cleaning pens. But it's the kind of thing that like, I think if you do end up cleaning pens a lot and you're using them all the time and you crust up your pens and it is taking you a lot of time, it may be worth it to you. But I don't know, really give it some thought. I'd be curious to know in the comments, like how many of you all have used ultrasonic cleaners before? Do you find them to be beneficial? Do you have particular ones that are better than others? I will say the bigger ones, are better for the batch cleaning kind of a thing. The Harbor Freight one that I bought, you can run it, but it's like, it needs a little break in between running. So it's like, you can't just like run the thing continuously. So it is better to kind of do it more in batches and stuff like that. So, either way, could be really helpful, but it's really up to you, depending on how much you want to spend. So, it's a little bit about ultrasonic cleaners. I've debated about doing like a ultrasonic cleaner video. I've never really done that before, I don't think, showing them sort of how they work. If that's something that's interesting to you all and you would like to see that, please let me know. Because again, it's like, I don't want to like endorse a particular product because it's not like my expertise, but if it is a process that you are interested in seeing, let me know and I'll think about putting something together for you. All right, next question. It's from Jeffrey Hall on YouTube. Says, I know that JoWo nibs are available at different places, including your Goulet branded nibs. That is correct. But do they sell matching feeds for the nibs as well? No, not separately that I'm aware of. It's not something that's available to us. I would imagine it's not something that's available to most others. And so that is not the kind of thing that is easy to come by. The only thing that I can think to get a spare feed is if you get a nib unit, so like the feed, the housing, the nib kind of in one unit. Then you can have that spare feed, but you're also getting a spare housing and spare nib. So that's the thing. If you say lose it or damage it or something like that, you may need to get one of those nib units, and then you just have some spare other parts, I guess, which is not the worst thing in the world, I guess. But as far as I'm aware, there's not just like spare feeds that you can buy at least not available through me. I don't know if there's like other feeds that would fit the JoWo, that it would sort of maybe change the flow or the fit or something like that. It gets a little tricky, but anyway, the nib unit, the only nib unit that we have that has the like standard JoWo feed is the ones that we have by Edison. So if you look at that, I think it's like $25, somewhere around there. I think that's right. I looked it up, but I didn't look at the price. Hang on, let me double check that for you real quick. They are $25. Yep, for a number 6 size unit. So you're getting the nib, but you're also getting a housing and the feed. So it's not like an exorbitant amount of money, but it's it's a little more of an investment. So do try to hang on to those feeds. Please don't lose them. But if you absolutely need to, you can get one of those nib units and do that. Now I will say, if you're looking on our replacement nibs page, you will also see nib units for Conklin and Monteverde. And while their nibs are made by JoWo, they are something specially made by JoWo for Conklin and Monteverde. They use their own feed and their own housing. So it's a little different setup. It's not using just like the standard JoWo, nib feed kind of setup like you see with, Edison or Franklin-Christoph or a bunch of other like independent makers use kind of those standard JoWos. So if you get a feed from the Conklin Monteverde, it will not be the exact same feed that you get as you will on like that Edison nib unit. I just thought I would mention that just in case, because it is a little confusing. Stuff gets complicated when you get into like all these parts and pieces and stuff like that. But either way, the Edison unit, that's about the only option that I'm aware of that you can get those spare feeds. All right, Phil Naughton on YouTube says, a question about ink, mold, or contaminated growth. Ugh. Should the ink be discarded immediately, or should it be saved by microwaving it to a high temperature or boiled in a container of water on a stovetop? I have read that this remedy can work, but I am wary of the results. I would be wary of the results too. Even if you're boiling it, there's still like stuff in there. I don't know, man. It's a little weird to me. I've never heard of anybody boiling the ink to get rid of mold that's like growing in the ink. I would be pretty skeptical of that. The kind of advice that I've always heard from everybody, pen restorers and all ink makers and all that kind of stuff is if there's mold in the ink, toss the ink. It's not worth the risk. Of course, this is like a your mileage may vary kind of thing. If you do whatever you want to do, if you want to experiment and do all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's like if there's any mold left in there, the risk of getting it in a pen and then making the pen moldy and transferring it to other inks and stuff like that, it's not the kind of thing that's happening like every day. I don't want you to be like paranoid about mold, because it is the kind of thing that, most inks have biocides in them to combat this. And I do know that a lot of inks, I've again, the process for making ink is rather proprietary, but I've heard enough here and there about how it's done that I know that, heating and kind of boiling the ink at some stage in the process is a part of it. I actually don't know if it's boiling it. I know that heating the ink is part of it. I don't know if that's part of what's used to like get the dyes to mix, or if it is part of like, getting rid of contaminants or whatever. But either way, I know that heating ink is a part of the manufacturing process, generally speaking. But I have no idea if that is something that's used to like boil off contaminants. I've never heard that is specifically the case. So I'm not really sure at what stage that's done or whatever. But the thing I would be, I guess partially concerned about is it actually getting rid of the stuff that's in there? I would say I don't really know. Also, because I think, if you boil, I think about if you're like having to boil water or something, if you live in an area where there's contaminated water, you have to boil it for like 2 minutes or something. You have to boil it for like a decent period of time, which I guess you could do with ink, but you're not dealing with that much ink. So I feel like you might end up evaporating a lot of the water. I feel like whatever you're doing to get rid of that mold would be very difficult to assure that you're getting the same properties of the ink as it comes out on the other side. So I would imagine you're going to be evaporating some of that water off of there by boiling for sure, which is going to, change the dilution, change the saturation level, right, of the dye in relation to that water. I would imagine if you're heating it to that degree, the dyes, like maybe the dyes would degrade or have some kind of reaction to it. So I would anticipate like the colors or the flow properties or something would probably change after the fact. So I just don't know. To me, it just seems like such a risky kind of thing that it's like probably not worth it. But you know, if you got moldy ink and it's just sitting there, you're going to toss it anyway. And you're like, whatever, I've got a crappy old pen. Let me try boiling it off and just see what happens. Do it as an experiment. More power to you. I think that would be interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to give that a try myself sometime. I really have not come across moldy ink very much in my personal experience. I know it does happen from time to time, but you know, maybe I'll keep an eye out. If I happen to come across some moldy ink, maybe I'll try boiling it and seeing what the heck happens. I have no idea. But anyway, I thought it was an interesting question. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious if anybody else has ever heard that, or maybe where that came from, if there's been success around that. I don't know. It's very interesting. Next question I have is from Suspicious Spell on YouTube. My question is, as someone with big hands myself, like me, what would be your recommendation for a first Sailor pen? I constantly hear about how addicting they are, and I wanted to hear your thoughts. Thanks. More than happy to share. Sailor has a bunch of different pens, and they're pretty consistent across, you know, there's different colors and stuff like that, but they're pretty consistent, like overall size-wise. So I thought this is a good question to answer, and I thought I could just show you a few of them and show you how they fit in my hands, because my hands are on the bigger side. So let me go ahead and show you a few of those. Okay, so starting out with some of like the intro level pens, we have the Sailor 1911 Compass. This is definitely on the more affordable end, but this is a steel nib pen. It's not necessarily indicative of what you're going to get with most of the other pens, but overall size is going to be fairly close to a 1911 Slim, the smaller one, or a Pro Gear Slim. So if you did want to get an idea for a much less of a cost of the size of that, might be okay. It's going to be on the smaller side, right? So this one, you know, for somebody with longer fingers like me, it's okay. It's definitely writable. It's a little more comfortable for me though if it's posted, because then I feel, you know, it's a little bigger in my hand. It's not like living quite on the edge there with my thumb in terms of writing with it. So writing with it posted, very comfortable. It's not too thin for me, so it's definitely doable. I just don't know that it's going to be the best representation of the Sailor Gold nib pens, but I can definitely recommend this pen. It's a very, very decent pen. And then there's the Sailor Tuzu Adjust. So this is their new pen that just came out, and it has a little bigger grip section. The pen itself is a little bit fatter, and you know, I'm not necessarily dealing with as short of a pen as what you have on the body here. It can be posted as well, which, you know, is also pretty comfortable. The cap's nice and light, so it does add a little bit of length to it, but it doesn't throw off the balance really. So this one is definitely one that I think would be fairly comfortable for people with bigger hands. And, you know, it's the same kind of thing though. It's a steel nib. It's not necessarily the same writing experience. It's a good writing experience. It's consistent. You know, the Sailor's quality is really good. So it'll give you somewhat of an introduction, but it's really not probably giving you the introduction that people are like talking about it being so addicting, right? So I've got Sailor's line up here with their gold nib pens, which is probably more what people are talking about. Now, in pretty much most of their models here, you're going to end up with the Pro Gear, which is like the flat top version, and then your 1911, which is the round top. There's a little bit of difference somewhat, but the overall dimensions are close enough where I feel like they can more or less be interchangeable. So you get whatever version, because there's a lot of different colors that come in one or the other. But the nibs are going to be the same in both as long as it's the same size. The nibs will be the same, and it'll just be a difference of colors mostly. The length will be maybe a little bit different, but it's pretty close. So first one I wanted to show, this came up earlier in Q&A here. This is the Pro Gear Slim Mini. It is very tiny. I can actually hold, I can hide it in here, you know, like stealth pen. It's very tiny. It is basically unusable for me unless I post it, which this one is a screw post, right? It's a triple start thread though, so you have to sort of line it up to get it. There we go. Well, it doesn't even line up perfectly with the nib. Look at that. So it's close, but it's a little bit off. So you kind of got to decide where the clip matches most for you, so it's not in your way. Even still though, it's about the length as I hold it as the Tuzu Adjust. So it's a pretty tiny little pen. This is one that I would not recommend for somebody with larger hands. It's doable. Like the overall diameter is workable, but the overall size is going to be, you know, it's going to feel like a little toy in your hands. Going on to the next size up, but there's also not a ton of options of this. So you'd almost have to go out of your way to get one of those. This is unfortunately no longer available. This is First Snow looks awesome. But this is the Pro Gear Slim Mini. Sorry, not Mini. This is the Mini. This is just a regular Pro Gear Slim. But the 1911S is going to be comparable in size to this. This one is doable. It's a little bit short, though. It's actually a little bit shorter than the 1911 Compass, actually. So if you see those two next to each other, you know, it's just enough for me where it makes a difference in my hand that I'm kind of feeling it right in there. It's workable, but it's kind of like needs to be posted, in my opinion. It's still comfortable, though. I mean, the balance is really good. The diameter of the grip is the only thing that's going to be maybe an issue for you. It kind of depends on what you find. We've got technical specs of all these different pens. So if you have another pen that you have that's on our site that's comparable, you can look at the grip diameter and you can compare it to any of these pens. I don't have all the stats here for you, but they're on our website. You can check those out. This one is workable. The nice thing about a lot of the slim pens is we do typically have more of the nib like grinds, the nib size options available for these pens. You know, they do tend to be pretty popular. A lot of people buy the different different nib grinds on these pens, so we do stock them a little bit more. They're more or less available on all their, slim and mid-size pens, but they're not all popular enough in all the colors for us to stock everything because they have 7 different nib sizes with every single color pen. It gets to be a lot. But anyway, so that is one benefit. You can maybe have more colors and maybe get some more nib size options. It is a little bit more affordable too than the bigger pens. But I would say it's workable, but if you have large hands and you like larger pens, you'll probably be left a little bit wanting from the Slims or the 1911Ss. The one that I really think would probably be best for you would be the 1911L or the Pro Gear, just the straight up Pro Gear, the standard or the mid-size, whatever it's called. So this one is going to be a little bit bigger, and it's going to be, one that is big enough to hold in your hand without having to post it if you don't want to. The nib is a little bit bigger, has a little more of a presence to it. Diameter is a little bit bigger, so it just feels a little more substantial in your hand. Now, it's not heavy. None of these pens are heavy. Like Sailor makes some very light pens, unless you wanted to go with some of the metal pen options or other kind of special things that they might have. But in general, their pens are pretty light. So yeah, this one feels pretty comfortable in my hand here. I like this as an all-around size. It's going to have a 21 karat instead of a 14 karat nib, which is going to write a little bit different. It's going to be just ever so slightly bouncier than what you're going to get here. But Sailor pens tend to be a little bit stiff, just overall anyway. But then, you've got different nib grind options. The one that I will say is probably the most interesting to consider as a starter pen, right, is going to be the ringless Galaxies. So I don't know if those are going to be available forever, but they have slightly less trim and stuff like that. They still look really good, but they are more affordable. So most of the 1911Ls and the Pro Gears and stuff in that range are going to be starting over $300, but the ringless Galaxy is $260. So you're kind of getting more in the price range of the Slim on those ringless Galaxies, but you're getting the size of the mid-size pen. So that is actually probably the thing I would lean you towards the most if you like that style. Those are pretty cool. And it's the same nib that you get on the other 1911s and the Pro Gears. So those are pretty cool. It's that mid-size 21 karat nib. And then you get the Mac Daddy. This is the king of pens, right? This is the one that actually feels like it fits a bigger hand. But it's really expensive. These start at over $800. And they're not as many nib size options either. So while I would say, yeah, ultimately, if you got big hands, this is the one that you would probably want to get to at some point, but there's no way that I would recommend this as a first pen, like a starter Sailor pen, unless you just want to swing for the fences and just go nuts. You're convinced that it's going to be something you love. If you have a chance to use one or write with one or borrow one from a friend, then it would give you more confidence. I will say I've had no regrets from getting one myself, but obviously I'm in the business and might be a little different for me. It's an expensive pen, so not one that I would typically recommend as a starter pen, but this is definitely the best one that fits big hands. But yeah, I think the ringless Galaxy, actually, 1911L there would probably be the best bet. Best bang for the buck for a big size hand. All right, next question I've got. This is from B. Feller. On YouTube, do you have any plans on carrying Franklin-Christoph pens? Well, yes, we have. I have 6 of them right here that we have done before. Now, we don't carry them regularly, only as kind of like single run pens. We've only ever carried the Model 31. We've carried 6 of them. So we have done basically like an annual kind of special edition, limited edition kind of a thing. We basically are limited by their capacity. So Franklin-Christoph, great company, they sell direct most of the time. They do pen shows and stuff like that. They will do collaborations and sort of co-branded stuff with companies like ours, but it's really kind of a special thing that they do, and they kind of like do that as they mix it into their production schedule as they have time, sort of a thing. So it's usually about once a year that we're able to do one of these, not a huge number of pens, maybe 130, maybe 150, something like that. So we have talked to them about possibly doing something more regular or whatever, but like they have their business model, and I totally respect that. They're doing it their way. It's the way they've been doing things for a very long time. I'm just honored to be a part of that in any form. So, it's a kind of thing that like we'll respectfully ask from time to time. And if they have more capacity, we would definitely be open to that. But it's not the kind of thing that like we can just, we can just get whatever we want. All we have to do is order it and we can just do it. That's just not how they do things. And that's perfectly fine. But highly recommend them. Go check out their site. They have great pens and good service as far as I've heard. But I am curious though, if the opportunity were to come about. I'm not saying that it is or will, but if the opportunity were to come about for us to be able to offer more regular Franklin-Christophs, what would you all like to see? I'm curious what is popular, what either pen models especially would be interesting to you all, if not specific like colors or materials or things like that. So if Franklin-Christoph's on your radar or you have a bunch, would love to hear about that, just so I kind of have that on my radar. All right, next up, this is from Jane Pilecki. Hi, Jane. On YouTube. Okay. Do you have any ideas for getting the shimmering bits out of a bottle of ink? Putting it through a coffee filter is not an option. There are some beautiful colors of ink out there that only come with shimmer in them. I intensely dislike shimmer and glitter in my ink. Well, you're not alone on that. It looks pretty, but it mucks up my pens, and I have no desire to disassemble a pen and nib to be able to put a toothbrush to my feed. Nor do I have the patience to continue to move my pen around while writing. I just want great color inks, not sparkling inks. I get the sparkle in my collection of Benu pens. There you go. You're not alone in this. Sparkling inks are cool. They're very, flashy and interesting, but it's not the thing for everybody. It's not what everybody wants to use all the time. So the question here is, if you have an ink that you really like, but you don't want the shimmer in it, can you remove the shimmer? And the answer is technically maybe, but really no. You can't do it easily because it's a very, very fine particulate that's in there. And separating all that out is a whole lot trickier than it is mixing it in. I actually don't know of a surefire way to do that without being in like some laboratory setting. That can, get it all out effectively and also maintain all of the existing properties of the ink and literally only remove the shimmer. I don't really know how to do that. The coffee filters, you said it's not an option, which is fine, but even if you were to do that, I don't know that the coffee filters would filter enough of it out to begin with. So you would still probably have a little bit of shimmer in there. So I don't know that that would be the answer. I haven't really tried that myself though, so I'd be curious any feedback if anybody has tried that. What you would need most likely would be a finer filter than that even. You would need like a micron filter, something like you would have for like a water filtration system. But those filters are usually pretty heavy duty. They're not really disposable, so it's not practical to use for an ink situation, especially a volume that's as small as like maybe an ounce or 30, 50 mils, something like that. So not super practical. There are these things that they make called single-use syringe filters. So syringe filters are the kind of thing that they are possible. They're in like the scientific kind of realm. It's used for like filtering stuff out of, other kind of liquids and stuff like that. Sorry, my phone just made a noise, and so I'm just going to shut it off. They're not cheap though. I was looking, I'm not a pro about all these things, but I looked them up. A syringe filter is going to be in like the $5 range per filter. So yikes, that gets pretty expensive. Honestly, your better option is going to be just try and find another ink that it's close to that doesn't have shimmer in it already. Filter paper. I don't know of any filter paper that might be a little finer than what you have on coffee filters. I'm thinking like, I don't know. This is made more for air filtration, but like house air filters, they use filter paper. But I don't know that it's the same filtering out liquid as it is filtering out air particulate. I genuinely don't know. Maybe if y'all have any scientific background, is that a feasible option? I don't know. Either way, house filters are not super cheap either. You would be like destroying them, taking the filter fabric out of there and cutting them up and all that kind of stuff. Is that worth the trouble? I have no idea. Probably not. But then the other thing that crossed my mind as I was kind of typing this out was like, what about masks? Like your N95 masks. Would that filter out? It filters out particulate and stuff in the air and like spit. Would that filter out, shimmer? I genuinely don't know. Might be something interesting to experiment with. But again, even if you were to do that, I would imagine that running your ink through some kind of filter fabric might filter out more than just that. It might change some of the properties. It might absorb some of the, some of the different, components of the ink so that it would change the balance of, maybe the, I don't know about the biocides, but about the surfactant, like the lubricant that's in the ink. I don't know if it would filter out some of the dyes and sort of shift the color a little bit. I would imagine that if you were to try to filter out the shimmer with a physical filtration system like a paper filter, it might have some unintended consequences with it. But I don't know. Might be curious if you are curious and have some shimmer ink that you don't use, and any of you out there, and if I get some spare time, maybe I'd be curious to try it for myself. But have some shimmer ink that you don't use, and have an old mask that you don't use or have used already, and you just want to filter it through and see what happens. I don't know. It might be interesting to see if it changes the properties. But yeah, I don't know. That was kind of the only thing that I could think that was like maybe practical, somewhat handy, might have a chance of working. But even still, it's going to be kind of messy, I guess, a little bit to do it. But still feasible. I don't know. You put it into decant it into like a little cup like this, and then you like syringe it out, and then you kind of like, put the mask filter like on top of your bottle of ink and kind of just drip it on there a little bit at a time. I don't know. Would that work? It's a good question. Might be something to experiment with. So there you go. I'm going to keep it kind of brief today. Somewhat brief. That's questions I got. We're not doing 10. We're doing 8 today. So please ask me more questions. I got a bunch that have come in already, saving up some for the future, but I always want to keep them coming. So definitely ask some questions here on the video, and would be happy to take more questions in the future. This is 3 in a row now that I've done, 3 weeks in a row. So again, unreliably commit is the name of the game for me. I will try to keep doing these as often as I can, and we'll see if I can keep it up. So appreciate y'all just kind of rolling with the punches, bearing with me as I try different things out and maybe kind of see how it goes. Being realistic and being practical is the name of the game for me right now. But I'm just happy to have you here along with me. So please, ask some questions so I have stuff for the future. Like, subscribe, check out gouletpens.com for all the stuff that talked about, lots more technical specs and stuff like that. So I do have a question of the week for you this week. This actually came from Kendall W on YouTube, who asked a question that I thought was actually a pretty good question. I was curious for you all to know. So Kendall said, what about using the poll feature or a Google form for, stuff for asking questions? I would be curious to know how many active notebooks that people are using, and what each notebook is used for would be cool too. I use 7 active notebooks, and I haven't heard of anyone using more than that. Am I crazy? I don't think you're crazy, Kendall. I mean, that's a lot of notebooks, but, so first I'll talk about the polls thing. So YouTube used to be able to do polls in cards, like in the video, it kind of pop up and you can do it. They got rid of that in 2020. So they haven't had that feature in a while. But even still, they got rid of that since the last time that Q&A was a thing. So that's not an option. They do have some poll features in the YouTube community, which is like just like the regular post feed, kind of like an Instagram feed within YouTube. I don't know how much you all use that, but I mean, it is interesting. We posted there for asking for questions and got a pretty good response. So we certainly could do a poll there and kind of post it maybe in tandem with posting, the Q&A video. So it's possible, but I don't know that it's not like as directly interactive unless I plan to do it and I mention it in this video and then do a poll. I don't know. We'll have to see if that's also a lot for me to remember and coordinate. So again, I don't know that I could even unreliably commit to remembering to do that, since it wouldn't be tied to the video necessarily. I don't know. We'll see. But either way, you can always leave comments here and stuff like that. So that is my question of the week for this week. How many active notebooks are you all using? Me personally, I probably use close to 7. I would have to count up. I have a lot of notebooks that I start using and then go to other notebooks and then switch back and forth. So I don't know what you consider active. Maybe I wouldn't consider those active necessarily, but I have at least probably 5 or 6 that I'm using actively. So I do have a traveler's notebook that has multiple notebooks within it that I use for different purposes. I just carry them all together. Do you count that as one or do you count that as several? I guess I would count that as several because the line ruling is different. I use them for different purposes. I just carry them together. And then I have another notebook that I use for other stuff, more personal stuff at home. I have one that I use for, I keep up my workshop so that I can sketch out things for woodworking purposes. I keep a TWSBI Eco out there with that kind of thing. So I have rodeo pads that I keep in my kitchen for to-do lists and things like that. I don't know if you consider that a notebook. Maybe it's more of a notepad. And then I have a journal. I have a some lines a day that I really wouldn't consider actively using. I did actively use it at one point. But either way. So mine are a little bit more somewhat purpose driven, but also kind of location driven. So yeah, I'm not necessarily using all of them actively every day, but when I'm doing the activity that I'm doing, I will use the notebook that is kind of associated with that. And so it's easier for me to just kind of keep the notebook with whatever the stuff is that I'm doing with that activity. So that's kind of how I do it. So, 4, 5, 6, something like that kind of fluctuates. But that's my notebook kind of routine. So very curious to hear what you all do. Anyway, that's all I got for this week. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see when number 287 comes out. Maybe next week. I don't know. Maybe not. It is Halloween next week, so we'll see how that goes. Plus Fountain Pen Day. Yeah, I should probably do one because it's going to be Fountain Pen Day. I'll definitely commit to doing one next week because it'll publish on Fountain Pen Day. I will commit to doing that. After that, who knows? But I will reliably commit to doing one next week for Fountain Pen Day because it just feels like the right thing to do. And I love fountain pens, so why not? Anyway, that's all I got this week. Thank you all for watching. And